cobbles, Alpe d'Huez and gravel. They've all been included in the presentation of the Tour de France and the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift a matter of hours ago. Exciting stuff. So the races will take place next year between the 1st and the 24th of July for the men and the 24th to the 31st of July for the women, giving us an entire month of racing at the very highest level. Coming up, we'll have all the details of both routes, but before we get onto that, I've got some good news. So we've managed to secure the rights to the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift, which will allow us to show that race and Paris-Roubaix Femmes across Europe except for France for at least the next 4 years on GCN+. It goes without saying, but we are incredibly proud and excited to be able to bring these historical moments to so many of you. Roll on July and April. So what is in store for the riders in 9 months' time? Well, rumours have been flying about in the weeks and months leading up to the presentation, including the inclusion of cobblestones, gravel and Alpe d'Huez, all of which have proven to be true. More on that later, but here's what the overall map looks like for the men. 3,328 kilometres, visiting 4 countries, Denmark, Belgium, Switzerland, and of course France. 5 summit finishes in 6 mountain stages, 6 stages for the sprinters, 7 hilly days, and 2 time trials. With a foreign start, the race will begin on a Friday and the riders will get their first rest day after the 3 stages in Denmark. From there, they'll head to northern France, taking in some cobblestones before heading east and to the first major climbs of the race. They'll then skirt slightly south to the Alps before the transitional stages take them over to the southwest and the Pyrenees, then onto a time trial on the penultimate stage, and finally the traditional laps of the Champs-Élysées to end the 3 weeks. So that's the overview. But I know you'll be wanting more details than that, so let's take a deeper dive. Now, we already knew that the men's Grand Départ next year would be in Copenhagen. That had been scheduled for 2020, but after COVID postponed the Tokyo Olympics to this year, ASO were forced to delay the Tour de France by a week, meaning the Grand Départ would clash with a major football tournament. Copenhagen didn't want that, and so Brittany stepped in this year, but will finally arrive in the capital of Denmark in 9 months' time. And for the first time in 5 years, the race will start with an individual time trial. 13 kilometres in length, and in the capital itself, this will set an early hierarchy amongst the GC contenders and also give us our first yellow jersey. Van Aert, POGAČAR, Roglic, Kung and Dennis will be amongst those licking their lips at the prospect of the yellow jersey if they're at the start, as will Filippo Ganna. This route on the opening day looks ideal for him to become the first Italian leader of the Tour de France since Giulio Ciccone back in 2019. Now, being a relatively flat country, the following 2 stages look almost certain to end in bunt sprints, finishing in Nyborg and Sonderborg respectively. Wind, though, could well be a factor as they trace their way around the 2 biggest islands in Denmark, but one thing we can be sure of is that the crowds there are going to be ginormous. From there, it is straight over to the northern tip of France and a stage which starts and finishes in the ports of Dunkirk and Calais respectively. Perfect for any British viewers who might want to take the short hop over the channel. Now, this stage has a few lumps and bumps along the way, but that area is also notoriously windy, so there could be a nervous peloton. And if they're not nervous there, they will be the following day for a stage that starts in Lille and finishes in Arenberg-Port-Hainaut. Now, that's a name that most of you will know well, and yes, it means cobblestones for the first time in 4 years at the race. So put this date in your diary, Wednesday the 6th of July. Over that stage, there will be 20 kilometres of pavé over 10 sectors, including 5 that apparently have never been seen in the Tour de France or Paris-Roubaix. It's then a short hop across the border into Belgium the day after, where Planche will host the start of Stage 6, the longest stage next year at 214 kilometres as they head to Longwy. After that, though, the hills arrive. Friday the 8th of July is the first big test for the climbers, heading from Tomblain and taking in a number of climbs before they arrive for the 6th time in the race's history at La Planche de Belleville. We will have more details on that later on, but let's get on to the second weekend of the race, where we'll be in Switzerland for the second part of Stage 8. It finishes in Lausanne, opposite the Olympic Stadium. The following day, we're at the headquarters of the UCI in Aigle for the stage start, tracing around Lake Geneva and back into France for the finish in Châtel, and that marks the first foray into the Alps. They will then enjoy their second day of rest, which they'll need because on Tuesday the 12th of July, they're back into the mountains. In fact, they'll start in the mountain resort of Morzine, where they will have spent their rest day, and head to Megève. On stage 9, they'll be finishing up a climb that won't be familiar to most of us, the Col de Granon. Now, it has been used once before at the Tour de France, all the way back in 1986, and at 2,413 metres above sea level, it was, at that time, the highest ever mountaintop finish of the race. However, for whatever reason, it has been absent since then. So nice to see its inclusion in next year's race then, and it is a serious test. 11.5 k's long at an average gradient of 9%, and with the Col de Telegraphe and Col de Galibier coming before it, and over 4,000 metres of climbing that day, it might well be the queen stage of next year's race. Or is it? Because the following day is pretty tough too, with a very famous finish. That's right, it will have been just under 4 years since the Tour de France visited Alpe d'Huez by the time they get there next year on Thursday the 14th of July. Bastille Day, no less, and it will mark the 31st time that a stage of the race has used this climb. 13.8 kilometres, 8.1% gradient and 21 hairpin bends, as if you needed reminding of the stats of this infamous climb. Now, I think I'm safe in saying that we cannot wait to see that return to our screens next year, and along with the Galibier and the Croix de Fer before it, this will be the day with the most climbing next year. A pair of brutal back-to-back mountain stages, and the second of them is a carbon copy of a famous stage from 1986. Teammates Hinault and Le Monde crossing the line hand in hand, showing an apparent truce after some infighting over the previous stages. From there, we have a trio of stages that will transition the race from the Alps over to the Pyrenees, and the first of those mountains comes after the third and final rest day. That's right, Tuesday the 19th of July sees the riders depart from Carcassonne, scaling the Porte de l'Air, 11 kilometres at 7%, and the Mur de Bigorre before the finish line in the beautiful town of Foix. The following day, stage 17 marks the fifth and final summit finish of next year's race at Périgueux. The Col d'Aspin, the Orquette d'Ancizan and the Col de Val-Laurent-d'Azay precede it, and there's no rest for the wicked as another one comes the following day at Hautecam. Most famous, I guess, for when Lance Armstrong got taken out by a musette before getting back on his bike and winning the stage before having the stage win stripped. Believe it or not, this will only be the 6th time this mountain has featured at the Tour de France and was last used in 2014, where Vincenzo Nibali increased his lead en route to overall victory. And this is the final mountain stage of next year's race. The Aubisque is followed by a brand new climb, the Col de Spandel, 10 k's at more than 8% before they tackle the Hautecam. After that, we've got a fairly flat stage into Cahors, but one with a few climbs towards the finish, so one of those days that might be for the sprinters, but might be for the breakaway. And then it's yet another penultimate day time trial. This one is from La Capelle-Moréval to Rocamadour, with a fair bit of climbing along the way in its 40 kilometres. At which point, the 2022 Tour de France winner will effectively be crowned, as all that remains is the sipping of champagne for the lucky few en route to the laps of the Champs-Élysées in Paris. And there you have it, a route that looks like it includes a bit of everything, even if it will upset the passionate cycling fans of northwestern France who miss out entirely on the route next year. Let's hear a couple of reactions from the riders now that were in attendance at the presentation.
Yeah, it seems like a really tough parcours. Even the first week, where it's normally getting into the race, you have the cobblestones, and the day after you have the longer stage, and then you have Planche de Belleville. So you even have a travel from Denmark coming to France, so it's going to be a tough tour with all the mountain stages also afterwards. So it seems like there are no easy days.
I'm looking forward to start in Denmark with the first week that will be really interesting with different type of stage and echelon, cobbles, climb. So yeah, I'm looking forward.
It's like when you open the gift for Christmas, almost. It was special, to see the whole parcours. Was pretty exciting, and I think it's going to be a pretty good tour next year. It's really complete, like you said, and you have everything. And I'm really looking forward to start again.
I mean, 5 uphill finishes, 2 time trials. We have cobblestones. What about those cobblestones? What do you think of that?
Yeah, nothing. You just need to be ready and to avoid bad luck. So we will see what happens. But you can lose the tour there, but for sure it's hard to win it.
For sure, the most spectacular thing is going to be the crossing of the Great Belt Bridge. That's I think that's going to be potential race deciding factor. If the winds are really strong up there, you can make some big gaps in 18 kilometers. That's for sure.
That sounds like something for your team.
Yes, definitely.
And it is your task, maybe.
I hope so. No, it's going to be. I think it's going to be a spectacular stage, and I've yet to cross the bridge without having some sort of wind up there. So I'm hoping we're going to have that as well that day.
Fantastic. It's amazing how excited you can get when there's still 9 months to go until the race. Not least because we won't have that normal lull after the final stage, because next year we'll be straight on to the women's. That's right, so let's move on to the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift. In 2022, the race will be 8 days long and take place entirely in northeastern France. It will be starting on the same day as the 21st and final stage of the men's race, with a start next to the Eiffel Tower before heading to the 12 laps of the Champs-Élysées, where a sprint finish will be expected. Lorena Wiebes will therefore start as the big favourite, you'd imagine, but don't count out Marianne Vos, who won La Course on this circuit in the World Champions jersey back in 2014. They'll be heading east of Paris for stage 2, which goes from Meaux to Provins, crossing the Brie region along the way. A relatively flat stage, but with a punchy, slightly uphill finish. Tuesday's stage 3 starts in Reims, host of the 1958 Women's World Championships and the capital of the Champagne region. It's a stage that is still relatively flat, but there are a couple of lumps and bumps over the final kilometres into Épernay. The following day, they'll be headed from Troyes to Bar-sur-Aube. With plenty of vineyards in that area, the organisers decided to utilise the Chemin Blanc, which trace their way through them. That's right, stage 4 will see the riders tackle some gravel roads that will no doubt have a big impact on both the outcome of the stage and potentially the general classification. Stage 5 is a long one, at 175 kilometres from Bar-de-Luc to Saint-Dié-de-Vosges, which also hosts the start of stage 6, where they'll be headed to Rossheim over some rolling terrain. The penultimate stage of the race heads from Célestat to Le Markstein, and this will be where the GC will start to be defined. And on first looks, this could be the hardest stage of the race. 3 tough ascents, all of which go over 1,000 metres above sea level, including the one towards the finish. The 8th and final stage starts in Lure, taking in the Ballon d'Alsace before finishing on La Planche de Bellefille. Now, this is a climb that was first used in 2012, but despite its relative lack of history at the race, it's already seen some very dramatic finishes. In the first year, Chris Froome took his first ever Tour de France stage victory, whilst helping Bradley Wiggins in the GC. Vincenzo Nibali and Fabio Aru added their names to the honours list in 2014 and 2017 respectively, whilst in 2019 it was Dylan Teuns who took the stage. However, the most dramatic scenes on this climb came when it was used in a time trial last year. Who can forget the drama that unfolded that day? Tadej Pogačar doing what most thought would be impossible, putting enough time into Primož Roglič to unseat him from his place at the top of the GC. I don't think any of us will ever get those images of Dumoulin and Van Aert looking on in disbelief as all their 3 weeks of hard work came undone in just an hour. With the nature of the route, there should be plenty still to play for on this 8th and final stage, and I, for one, will be glued to my screen on Sunday the 31st of July next year for the grand finale. Let's now get a reaction from the presentation of the women's race.
How successful do you think this is going to be going forward in women's cycling?
It's going to be massive. I don't think we realize yet how it's going to be. I'm super excited after today, of course, and I don't know, I have the feeling that it's a really good vibe coming. People are so happy for us, people are really waiting for it, and the course is amazing. It's going to be really a good show, so just let's do it.
How excited are you for next year?
Mega. I'm really excited for this, and it's huge, and it's the exposure that we are getting with the Tour de France, because the Tour de France is just the Tour de France, and everyone knows the Tour de France. My grandma knows the Tour de France, so you know. And when I'm asked, do you cycle? Then you do the Tour de France. Now I can say yes, I do the Tour de France too.
I really like the first part of the Tour de France. Good for sprinters and classic riders, and of course the second part will be for the climbers and the general classification with a lot of mountains, but yes, I really like all the stages.
This race is so inspiring for young cyclists, young children, young women. How do you think this is going to inspire them in the future, you know, to grow up and see, you know, a women's Tour de France with the men's?
Yes, when I was a child, My parents bring me to the Tour de France, and so yes, now racing the Tour de France is wonderful, and I think that it will be a wonderful race also to see for the people, and yes, is beautiful.
Now, for those wondering, the jerseys at the Tour de France Femmes will be the same as the men, so yellow for the overall leader, green for the points, polka dot for the best climber, and white for the best young rider. Now, along with the welcome news of this race next year, Christian Prudhomme also announced today that the Serra-Tizit Challenge by La Vuelta will be 5 days next year, so it feels like we've really got some momentum going around women's racing, albeit with plenty still to do. Right, we will wrap things up there, but of course we'd love to know your thoughts about next year's route, and you can leave them in the comment section down below. Cheers all, see you soon.